Hello, my name is Aleksander Lipski. I came today, actually 2 days ago, from Poland. I work for the Roche company. It operates in the pharmaceutical industry. And let's start. 3 years ago, I got an opportunity to actually join that company. And there was a challenge. They wanted to introduce more software testing practices. They want to also introduce software testers on the board to one specific area of their company. And before that, I was working as a contract for 7 years. And actually being on a contract, it's a different type of the work. Because on one hand, you can share a lot of ideas, you can put a lot of solutions, but on the other hand, your actually impact on the changes is very much limited. So when I heard about that opportunity, I actually applied. I got the job, and from then on, everything got a pace. So the first week, I got the obligatory training, and second, I needed to go to the headquarters of our company. And on the third week, actually, my journey really started, and I was invited to the workshop for one of the team, and they asked me to prepare a couple of the slides. That was the catch. A couple of slides about quality ideas, something that I will actually bring to their team. And the workshop took place in a really nice city, the city of Madrid, in Spain during the holiday time. Great weather, great food. So the first 2 days I met a lot of new colleagues and everything went smoothly. But on the third day, there was actually my time for my couple slides. So I remember when I was standing in front of the team, I put my slides on and I went through the agenda, and on the first slide, I tried to explain that the concept actually of the software tester, what the value he or she can bring. And I tried to say, as much as I can from my experience. And then one lady actually raised her hand and she asked, what do you really mean? Why do we need the software tester, right? So then I tried to explain, and that question somehow encouraged others to raise other questions, and more questions and more questions. And after 30 minutes, I realized that I'm still on that second slide. The presentation is not going very well. And the workshop moderator somehow wanted to stop that discussion. And she said something that I remembered, and I will remember probably for my life. She said, we need to stop it now. Apparently, you don't have enough knowledge yet. If you know more, then you can come back to us, and then we can discuss. So having in mind, the professional career, that was like the most awkward moment, right? In this. But, once the emotions went down, I started to think. Yeah? So looking on the bright side, at least they have remembered me, right? But still, actually, the question was, the question why I could not communicate with them that well, was not answered. Because, I've been working in different industries for different clients. And in theory, the ERP, because that was the ERP systems and the teams were supporting the ERP systems, that systems are very similar to other systems that I was, testing. They have that database, they have some logic in between, some user interface, and so on. Right? But it turned out that I was wrong, and simply that my hypothesis that it was a different software world. So what is actually the ERP? So ERP stands for Enterprise Resource Planning, and these are the systems which support the big organizations. And the reason why the reason why I was invited actually there is to actually see if there are some opportunities to bring some maybe more quality, to have some fresh perspective. And as I said, they support the big organization. So if they are such a big, what makes that ERP system so much different from the system that I've been testing so far? So let's start from the size. And to give you the feeling, imagine the plane cockpit. So think about the number of switches, displays, controls, and this may represent like a standalone business application, where at the end there is one goal: the plane needs to fly, and the a business application needs to support one of the business needs. And now thinking about the ERP, it's more like this. So the control room in a nuclear power plant. You still, maybe it's not more complicated, but number of display switches, all the controls, it's simply bigger because they support bigger and longer end-to-end processes. And speaking about the size, that's something that we can see from a distance. But when we take a closer look, what we'll see actually is the complexity. And why complexity? Because as I mentioned, they support, large organization. And as big organization, in our case, this is 100,000 employees, right? They support many different areas, from marketing, from distribution, from logistic, human resources. And the bigger organization it is, the bigger and the more complex actually the system behind to support, to make the company work on a worldwide scale. And when we actually connect these two things, like a size and the complexity, the only way actually to achieve it is through the integration. And unfortunately, I learned this by hard way, because I was asked to prepare the test plan, the test strategy for one of the components that was going to be replaced. It was HR component. So I thought it's maybe not a big deal to create the strategy. I've been doing this for other applications. But when I started looking into the documentation, architectural documents, it turned out that system is actually connected to 50 other systems, and there's like 200 different connections. All right, so having more knowledge about the ERP, also, to be honest, a little more respect, right, for that area, I wanted to try again, to bring back that concept of the software testers. So this time I didn't want to, stand in front of the whole team. I just thought maybe I would try to talk with one of the SME from that area. I prepared myself. I prepared arguments. I had all my slides this time, without that software tester and the agenda, something different. And I invited the person for a meeting. I thought that everything is going smoothly, but at the end, I just heard no. No, because the systems are too complex. We cannot bring people with, less experience in ERP to handle actually the testing there. Right? So for me, it was like a back to the drawing board, right? So I was missing something. The technical thing, I figured a little bit, I understood it. But as always, when there is a problem, you have like a technical problems, and you actually have problems with the people. And that was actually what I was missing here. The human factor. And that's the other hypothesis I put here, that the ERP, for me, back then was a different software community. And the best way to explain it is actually to look at the history. Yeah, how did it look? So from the beginning of the ERP systems, it was a word of the functional consultant. So functional consultant is someone who is in between, let's say, business analyst or the developer, and they were responsible for implementing, for configuring, for customizing, and for testing. That's one thing. Second, I believe that most of us, feel as part of the software testing community. And our community is very open, willing to share, and also willing other people to join, right, our community. And looking from that perspective, the ERP community looked for me more like isolated, not that willing to share. And this actually lead us to the next point, which is how to become part of that community. Because if you want to join, right, the community, you have to take into account that there's a lot of knowledge around the ERP systems. So one fact that illustrates it very well is that people can spend, their whole lifetime being an expert in just one module. And now, to become part of it, the second thing is you have to train somewhere. You have to, improve your skills, but you cannot download any, ERP system and see how it works, and implement the business processes, because you simply don't know. You can only learn it when you are already a part or supporting one of the company. It all makes, it very complex. And the other thing that I was also realized is, as always, at each community, they have also their own language. So in my case, just one example, the units test. So for me, the units test was always connected with a code. However, when it comes to the ERP, what for them, the units test is actually the test of the smallest piece of the functionality with the user interface, like a transaction code. And if you want to distinguish, between the units test that is correlated with the code, you have to put the language name there. So for example, ABAP unit code. So for the 3 months, we were using completely different language when we were talking about strategy and the testing layers. Okay, and the last piece that makes that area different, I would say, regulated environment. So Roche is operating in the pharmaceutical industry. It means that for the system that may have an impact on the patient, we need to store evidences on how the software development went, if we have enough evidences to show to the auditors. All right. So these were like my key takeaways, entering that uncharted waters. And now I want to share what we did in terms of the software testing, not only in the ERP, because I'm working in kind of the consultant internally for different teams. And I gathered all these lessons and just wanted to show it to you. Waste in the software testing. Let's start from it. Imagine a system. The project took 1 year to get it on the production. It's on the production already for 10 years. During these 10 years, 20,000 test scripts, manual test scripts have been created. By manual, I mean like a step-by-step test procedure. Now, for every these test script, we need to have a connection to the functional requirement, to the user requirement. And now every manual test script has to be reviewed by has to have 3 signatures by 3 different people at the moment when it's designed. And when it's executed, after the execution, another 3 signatures. So if your gut feeling says that there's something wrong here, probably we're on the same page, right? Because that's what is the main source of the waste in software testing. So overproducing the unnecessary testing documentation. That is our biggest lesson. Second, we are operating in a regulated environment, and we have to take care of our patients, and there is no negotiations about that. And at the same time, we also have to acknowledge that not every system has a direct impact on the patient risk. And what we do very often, we want to really stay on the safe page that even if the system is, for example, like HR, and the connection to the system that is having some impact is very far away, we still apply the full-blown documentation, all the high-risk approaches that we do for other systems. So that's the other ways in our case, that we apply too many documents. We store too many evidences for the system that don't have the direct impact. So simply we don't follow the risk-based approach. Second, the over-processing. If you will think, what needs to happen before you actually execute the formal tests from user requirements, functional requirements, and the script, 3 signatures at the end, just to perform 1 test script, then you will see that it's simply too much. It's too complicated. So we need to be very careful to stay still on the safe side. So there are some steps that needs to happen, but the question is if all of them. For example, do we really need to have all these 3 signatures? We used to do this for like 10 years. But when we started investigating it, that turned out that the 4 eyes principle, this is what actually is really required. Just one example. And the third one, in terms of the waste, imagine what happens when we want to execute the test script that was written like 5 years ago. And now we want to execute it as part of the regression testing suite. The application during this 5 years have changed, but not necessarily the documentation. And now if we really want to perform it, right, what will happen, we'll have a mismatch, right? The application still works fine, and somehow the test script was not updated. So going by the book, what we should do, we should raise a defect, and we call it like a script issue or script defect. And based on this, we can fix the script, go through all the signatures again, and then we can execute it again. So looking from the perspective of the value for the product, for the patient, there's really no value. So that's the third source of the waste, like a redoing and the defects for the test, for the documentation. "13 years ago, I had a day that you also have, the day which you remember for very long. This is the first day at your new job, like a first day at your professional career. So I remember my first day. I met with my new manager in the morning, and he said something, Alek, unfortunately, we don't have a space for you in the testers area neighborhood. There's no desk for you on the floor. And you will have to sit with programmers for 3 months. Is it okay? Of course, during the first day you don't, disagree, right? So I said, yeah, that's fine. And what he said also is he gave me kind of advice. That team that you are going to sit with, these are like a core team of programmers. They were from the very beginning in our bank. And, don't show off too much. Don't, waste their time because they're not that nice, let's say, right? And I went there, and this is what happened. After 3 months, we made really good connections. I raised a lot of questions. Of course, some of them were maybe stupid, but they still answer it. After a couple of weeks, they started asking me if I can look into their code, right? Before they commit. And it turned out that it became kind of not tradition, but as a good practice. We didn't have any process for it, but it was just naturally we were collaborating. And this actually, now when I think, what has happened then, now we have a label for it. So some companies, they call it the role of the person who is doing it. It's kind of quality assistance. And the process, let's say, or the piece of the process is actually the shift left. Yeah? And the problem with the shift left of the attention to the quality, I really like to add it. So we shift the attention to quality. As we did in that room, they were asking me about my tasks before they commit the code, the branch. But the problem with this shift left is that people don't get, on some level, we couldn't explain it very well. And what we are doing right now, when we talk about the shift left, I give an example. So imagine that you are going to invite me to the meeting. And somehow we meet in the morning over the coffee, and I say, you know what, if anyone invites me for a meeting, right, I really like when it starts on time and when it finishes on time. And the no-go for me, for me, is when I got the invitation for a meeting without the agenda. I will reject it, and that just pass it away to you, right? And then you come back to your desk, and then during the day I need to invite Alek for the meeting, and then you start creating the invitation in your calendar application, and there's a big chance that you will remember, right? If I will not put the agenda there, Alek will reject it. So this is what happened. Of course, it's not the rule, but what happened? People feel ashamed if someone will tell them, before what will happen, and they will do this anyway. So if you will do this, if you will follow it, and you put the agenda, what I did actually, I kind of embedded, the good practices for meeting invitation, and before you find it, later, you find it, much earlier. So if we will come back to the programming, this is how we try to explain it, in our teams. And the other thing that we also add is that meeting should really be time boxed, like 10-15 minutes maximum. And most important, it doesn't have to be a tester, someone with a label like a tester, but someone who will play the role of the quality, will have the quality mind. So someone who will ask those quality related questions. And the other thing, it has to happen, as it's here, before the development, before actually the build starts. Another system. One ERP system that covers, let's say, 1/4 of our ERP needs for organization. 500 test scripts as part of the regression suite. At some point, there's a decision that we would like to automate it. So there was a project of automating this 500 regression test scripts. And the project, ended us with a success, right? All these automated test scripts, went through. They are, green. And now let's move 1 year later. What has happened after 1 year? So we went there to that project, to that team, and we checked how many of these test scripts were executed more than 2 times. And what we saw, it was really amazing. Less than 10% of the scripts were executed more than 2 times. And this is what actually is happening in a big organization. And I really like to show that picture because it showed the mindset of the people who actually make sometimes decision about the automating. So this is how they see, right, the automating. So we will automate the human behavior or the things that people do. And And most of my time that I spend in discussion about the automation in my company is actually about challenging the unrealistic expectations from the automation. And I try to use terminology like verification, which is more like for the automated thing, so we actually verify only, and use that term like a testing, which is reserved for a human. But to be honest, it didn't work. Introducing new words is kind of tricky. And this is actually what helped us, and thanks to Richard Bradshaw. I think you noticed that there was a big space, right? So we put the automation in testing. And I start my discussion always from not automated testing, but actually automation in testing. And if we start from that kind of the game, like playing the words, I try to explain why we should really think about automation supporting testing, not replacing. The other challenge with introducing the automation is that we use the systems that are very old. And what we do now as a lesson learned, we never start these big projects anymore. We start very small. And second, we need to think how to embed the automation testing into the process. We need to have a strategy simply for the automation. Okay. Another case. We wanted to create a new test team for that ERP, one of the ERP system. And we hired actually two people. And by accident, they have both named Piotr. And the first Piotr, he had 5 years of experience in software testing. And the other Piotr, he had just 6 months of the online training. It was his first real job. After 6 months, the first Piotr, the one who's supposed to lead, he decided actually to not lead, but to leave our company. And during the exit interview, he tried to be honest, and he said, so we asked why, of course. And one of the reasons, there's always many reasons, but one of the reasons, he said there was simply too much information. He was overwhelmed. He couldn't handle, that complexity of the system and so on. And today, the second Piotr is actually leading that small team, but more important, he's a partner with the functional experts, and he performed these meetings, we call it shift left meetings, and he gained the authority. And this brings us to actually my last point, the people, our lesson in the people. As it turned out that when you go into the uncharted water, it's less what is your experience. It's more, about your attitude. And second, how fast you can learn. How fast actually you can adapt and gain new knowledge. And speaking about the people, I would like to share my recent thing, because I need to say I have changed. So I stopped believing that the label software tester makes you a superstar. I stopped believing that if you are part of the tester team, you are anyway better from the other development team. Because what is actually really important, even if you want to be a super tester, superstar, that's fine. I still encourage you to do this. But you have to keep in mind that your impact is always limited to because you are an individual. And today it's more about how you can train, how you can actually explain the quality concepts. And at the end, how well you can give that quality mind to other teams. So these were the lesson learned in the software testing. And when we are introducing, some of these, we also realize that part of the learning is not about the testing, but actually about introducing the changes. So now I would like to share with you actually some lessons learned in introducing the changes in our organization in the regulated environment. So before I start to set up the scene, we are working in a regulated environment, which means that we need to collect for the life-critical system the evidences. It also means that the main approach to the testing is a scripted testing, because then we can show what we've planned for this testing, what the evidences we have collected. Quite contrary, there's exploratory testing, where you can plan in general, but you don't really know where you will end up. And also the level of the documentation depends, on the tester. And now I will try to show you the case study. Exploratory testing in regulated environment. So that's actually the true story, what we tried to do. One more thing, I am biased. I will say it loud. I am biased into the exploratory testing. I'm biased into the context-driven thinking. And now I somehow, find myself in a regulated environment, which, the exploratory testing is not that welcome. And I think it made it, even more interesting. So we started in 2017. I wanted to actually do exploratory testing in one of the team. So how I did, hey, let's start the exploratory testing, yeah, because that's the best way. That's, critical thinking is more important. We don't have to follow the manual test script that someone have written like 2-3 years ago. And in our organization, we have another team that is actually overseeing the testing, not only testers, but also the developers. We call them validation team. So they make sure that whatever we did, was according to the book and so on. So then the team said immediately, no, simply no. You cannot go because you will break all the rules, right? 2018, there was a webinar sorry, not webinar. So in 2018, I came across one of the company who wanted to introduce exploratory testing into their organization. They were also a medical company, but they added, thanks to James Bach, they added the word validation, exploratory testing validation, to make it a bit, nicer to the auditors. And I thought maybe that's a good idea also to try it, in our organization. So it was at the beginning of the year because we need to set up the goals. So I took, let's try again, right? It's exploratory testing validation. We call it ETV. And I prepared small experiment, just myself. Why not, right? I wanted to test something. So I created, the fake session but real application, right? I was pretending that I am doing it. I showed all the things that are, that becomes as a result, as a test documentation, small one. And I prepared all of these, and I went to the company community of practice for that validation. We call them analysts, validation analysts. There was a group of 40 people, right? Who all day long, they are verifying if we still meet the standards, right? We follow the procedures, right? So it was 1 hour presentation, and I heard again, no. Why no? And they give me a lot of arguments, right? Because we are breaking that guideline, that procedure, that standard operates the other procedures and the policies, right? Simply. And then 2019, there was that webinar from one of the consultancy company who is cooperating with FDA. And even though that the webinar is not very official, there are no documents yet, like signed off by FDA, but they mentioned something like a limited scripted testing, and they put the critical thinking on the top of the pyramid instead of having the documentation. Sorry, on the bottom. Previously the documentation was on the bottom, now they want to change it, because they realized, one of the argument was, they realized that the actual regulations are very often limiting the innovations, right? So they wanted to show a different perspective of it. Anyway, I took that, concept, limited scripted testing, so something in between the exploratory testing and actually the formal scripted testing. This time it was not only me, we had 2 more people, one from the testing team, and I was able to convince one of the validation, the most open-minded one, to actually help us to see if it's possible, right, to introduce that limited scripted testing to our organization. So we performed 2-3 experiments, and what we did, we went to the teams and we said, you know what, we know that you are doing that, that script, you have to execute that script, but maybe for one feature, for one change, you will do simultaneously that limited, for the other person would do this, and we will compare the results, see how the coverage looks like, how the documentation looks like at the end. We also went to the community of practice for the testers, and we asked testers to have, to do some exercise. So we gave them, application and told them, you have 20 minutes, now you will test it without any guidelines, and we wanted to see what is the result. And then exactly 1 year later, we went to that community of practice validation meeting again, and this is what we've heard. Yes, I know it's probably, you don't see it from the back, but there is yes, but. So they were kind of convinced, maybe that's a good approach, but we still don't have the documentation. We saw our guidelines, they don't support it. Yeah? So once the validation, after the validation committee of practice meeting, the idea became so popular that it became kind of the viral. So different teams were coming to us asking how we are doing it, how we can limit the waste. So there was even more, POCs and the experiments. And at the end, we needed to go to the governance board. We call it IT quality. So this is the group that is actually approving all our standards and making sure that we really, are compliant with worldwide regulations, yeah, for the pharmaceutical companies. And to make it long story short, we heard yes, simply, we can do this. But what was actually in the proposal? We didn't say about the limited scripted testing or exploratory testing. We were asking them if we can differentiate the approach to the testing based on the risk. So we called it like a level of testing documentation. And of course, we acknowledge that there is a scripted testing needed for the high-risk features, high-risk systems. But there's also the medium risk, where we don't have a big impact on the patient. So maybe we don't need so many documentation. And finally, or lastly, they also agreed to the exploratory testing for the low-risk systems, for the low-risk features. For example, we have out-of-the-box solutions, which we even don't configure. Right? And don't take me wrong, it's only about the level of testing documentation. But now we can also look from a different angle about the deepness of this testing. So thanks to this proposal, we can actually mix. So we can have a scripted testing as a level of documentation and supported by the exploratory testing, in the earlier phase. So what are the lessons from this? The first one, right? It took time. 2.5 years, right, to introduce the concept. We're still not there. We don't have the document signed off, but still we have so many arguments and we have the green light that eventually we will be there, right? Second thing, probably you notice, the violet circles, the more we have them, the farther we go. So simply, my takeaway from it, no matter how good idea you have, don't treat it as a final truth, but treat it more as a hypothesis. And as every hypothesis, you have to test it. Yeah? You have to prove it that it's okay. So the same was with us. Okay, and now some more general lesson learned in introducing the change. Remember when I said at the beginning, I started by myself. And to be honest, the biggest improvement we did when actually I took on board one of the tester or one of the validation analysts. And this is actually my takeaway. You have to. I know it's maybe obvious, but you have to inspire others for the big changes. Not only to have a bigger impact, but if you have others, you can easily see if that idea resonates with your, with your neighborhood, to see if they see it in the same way as you see it, right? Second, we had a problem. The problem was we spent too much time on creating the test script, the testing documentation. Also, the problem was that we actually wanted to let the tester to apply more critical thinking, to have a bigger scope of the testing. And our solution was, as you saw, the limited scripted testing and the exploratory testing. But then what turned out, that solution actually created a new problem for us, right? How we will change the guideline? What is the training that we have? For 10 years, we trained the testers to follow the scripts, and now we are changing, our mindset. So for us, it was a new problem. And here's the takeaway from it, right? Every solution breeds a new problem, and you have to acknowledge it. So you may ask, shouldn't we change or shouldn't we improve the things, right? If we will create if we eventually will create problems, I think we should, right? Still innovate and propose new solutions, but also having in mind that the new solutions eventually will create the problems. And from now on, you can think about this. If I will propose something, if I will apply some solution, and eventually I will create a problem, if that new problem will be the same painful as the initial problem that I'm trying to fix. I talked today a lot about failures, about moments where people said no. And I'll be honest, I took it somehow personally, right? After such a meeting, it's not nice feeling, right? Where people don't agree with you. And at some point, I went through the book from Jerry Weinberg, and that's the quote that, I really like it. Since nobody's perfect, we need resistance to test our ideas. And when I started to think about it, what I realized is all of these ideas that I was actually proposing, and when people were saying no, they were actually tested me. Me as a software tester, finally I was tested by someone else, and I felt like a programmer for a moment, right? And it was not, for me, it was something new completely. And this is, the takeaway, actually appreciate resistance. Because after these meetings, what happened, when the emotions, are going down, when you collect all these no's and yes, but, or all this, fears that people have, all these arguments, it becomes a big checklist of the things that you need to consider before you come again. So for you, it's actually the advices that you have for what's your next step. And if you still don't agree with me that we should appreciate people, resisting, just a small 3 seconds exercise. Imagine that in your life, for every great idea that you had, everyone, every time would say, great, go on. It's a really nice one. So these are the things that I wanted to share with you. Yeah? Some of my struggles at the very beginning, acknowledging the fact that I'm in a different world, lesson learned in the software testing, and lesson learned in introducing the change, but I still owe you something. I still owe you the ending of that story with the software testers teams, right? What has happened? Because we tried with introducing the software testers in that ERP, just as one team, so it worked, but on really small scale. We didn't make it standard. On the other hand, we actually wanted to train the functional expert, and it worked. We are doing this way. But also we thought maybe there's something else. And when we thought about all these advices that people gave us, right, where we need to take into consideration that the ERP systems are really complex and you have to understand them before you actually can test them, we figure out maybe we can think about the third option. Why actually not create the role that we are looking for? So we decided that as part of the graduate program, we will have a role that we will train in 2 things. The first 6 months in a software testing, giving some ideas, techniques to grow that quality mindset, and the second month for the other 6 months for the ERP. So at the end, they could become a junior functional expert with a quality mindset. So for us, it was kind of the breakthrough. And actually now it's time for you, right? If we were able to do this in such a circumstances, in a regulated environment, right? What's your actually uncharted waters? What you can actually change, right? Because at the end, you will improve your organization, but even more important, right? You will gain more knowledge and you will grow yourself. Thank you.